Welcome to Bridge the Gap podcast. I'm your contributor host, Cara Silletto. If we haven't met yet, I'm the president and chief retention officer at Magnet Culture, a firm dedicated to reducing unnecessary employee turnover, and I am the creator of the employee retention ecosystem, which we are going to talk more about today. On my last episode, I introduced this idea of the ecosystem, and we talked through the evolution of the workforce, how the workforce used to be like deep-rooted oak trees that are pretty dependable and sturdy and stable, and they didn't often transplant themselves. They would stay at a company for a long, long time. And now our new workforce, unlike deep-rooted trees, is more like houseplants. And I mean that in a great way. There's a variety of wonderful, beautiful, fabulous houseplants. But instead of oak trees, they value mobility, right? Where trees might value that stability and depth. The new workforce today wants to be able to move, wants to be able to grow in their careers, either at the same organization or, of course, be able to bounce around if needed. Also, this houseplant theory explains that every single person on our staff is like a different houseplant, which means they have a different need from their leaders. We cannot treat people as one size fits all any longer. Every single person on our team, similarly to those we serve and those we care for, they need an individualized care plan. So today I'm going to share a glimpse into this new comprehensive retention model that guides organizations to work on various aspects of their business, their organizational culture, and even the structure of the company and the org chart so that we can truly create a place where people want to work. Now, I've been doing this work for the last 13 or so years, and most of that within the whole continuum of care, of healthcare, especially the senior care side. And we saw folks kind of piecemealing their efforts and going from one thing to another, onboarding to compensation, leadership development, things like that. And they didn't actually have this holistic approach where everything is connected. So after, like I said, 13 years of doing retention work, we finally put all of the different pieces that we feel need attention into this one model. This is the employee retention ecosystem model. So if you think about the word ecosystem, some people kind of ask me, okay, what is that again? Or what, like, I haven't used ecosystems in more of a business sense, right? Because we think ecosystem like in the ocean or in our backyard of all those predator and prey and maybe a tree drops an acorn and the squirrel uses the acorn or plants the acorn and it makes another tree and the worms are involved and the soil and all of those things. Well, any ecosystem you think about under, in the ocean or in your backyard, you have to think about all the parts have to work together, right? They all have their own responsibility, their own role in that ecosystem. And when one thing isn't working well, it's really hard for the other folks to do their job or for the ecosystem to really be healthy and sturdy. So we applied that into the work world and said, all right, what does a struggling ecosystem look like? And what does a thriving ecosystem look like? So when I talk to organizations that are struggling with retention and their culture, oftentimes the executives feel they're just not getting any ROI from their initiatives. They're throwing money at things, but they're not seeing the return and the consistency on that. The leaders also feel totally behind, just underwater all the time. They are struggling to get their head above water at any given point. And that is frustrating and not sustainable, right? And then, of course, the staff, they feel overworked and undervalued. My boss doesn't have time for me. They're always in meetings. They're always fighting fires. And we see these struggling ecosystems all the time where people can envision a better future. Man, wouldn't it be nice if, but they don't necessarily know how to get there. So when we ask that question of what would it look like if you had a thriving ecosystem, and also when I've been able to see those in with my own eyes, we find that in those scenarios, the executives have clarity. They are able to expedite their cultural initiatives and efforts because they know what direction they're going and they know how everything impacts the other components of that culture as well. Then in the thriving ecosystem, the leaders finally find time to truly lead their team and to be there for their staff, for mentoring, for onboarding, for better communication, all those things. And the staff then realize, wow, I found a great place to work. So I'm going to come back tomorrow because this place doesn't suck. Sorry to be crass, but just try to lighten the mood here a little bit. All right. So, with that idea of kind of what does a struggling ecosystem look like versus a thriving ecosystem, now we just need to figure out whose role is what are the responsibilities that everybody in the organization needs to own in order to get this change. All right. So, if you would, if as you envision this ecosystem that I'm about to describe to you, I want you to think first about all the employees are different houseplants. So just imagine kind of a room full of all these different types of houseplants. You got high maintenance, low maintenance, everything in between, maybe some tropical, all those things. Okay, well, that means if the staff are the houseplants, then our leaders are the gardeners. So envision a watering can, some hand tools for gardeners, and they're walking around that room, checking on each one of their individual plants, making sure that they have what they need. All right. So the leaders are the gardeners. Well, then what does that make the executive team? How do they plan into this? Well, the executives are the providers that create this environment. So you could kind of put maybe a greenhouse type of covering over this group to say, all right, the executives are going to protect these houseplants and the gardeners. And the executive team is going to give those houseplants and gardeners the tools and the resources that they need to be successful. All right. So that's kind of the first visualization that I want you to think about is this room full of houseplants. You've got the gardener managers walking around with all their tools, taking care of their people. And then that executive team has created the roof, the walls, all the resources. The supply closet is full of everything that everybody needs because that executive team has given them those resources. Okay. So the other visual that I want you to kind of envision with me is some people are left brain and right brain. And so we also wanted to make kind of a textbook model of this framework that we now work from. So if you think about it, start in the middle, we're just going to have a circle. And that circle is broken down into three different roles. This is our staff, our leaders, and our executives. Now, each one of those three roles has two responsibilities. Okay. Each one has two different responsibilities. So for the staff, for example, we want every single person in our organization to be able to take root in their job and grow in their position. Now, under these responsibilities, it dives in deeper to all different actions they have to take. But the way that we think about this take root is I want somebody to come into their job. I want them to show up, to be mindful of those around them, and to build connections. That's the basics, right? Wouldn't it be nice if every single employee that we hired came in and they took root in their position? They showed up, they were mindful of others, and they started building connections with those that we serve and those that they work with. Wouldn't that be great? This is kind of the fundamental baseline of where we need to be. Now, there's a second responsibility for the staff as well. Once they take root in their position, we want them to grow in their role. Now, the actions that we have seen that we need to help people, sometimes this takes mentoring and guidance, but we want folks to learn to speak more thoughtfully and just more effectively, right? We can all communicate better over time. We need everybody to be able to make adjustments, is the second action there. And the third one is to think critically. Hopefully, in every position, every role in the organization, people know how to troubleshoot their own role, their own job. In fact, we've seen kind of a decline of critical thinking and problem solving in some of our workforce for various reasons, including just having instant access to information at our fingertips makes us not necessarily have to think on our feet as quickly. And we tend to go to our bosses and say, hey, boss, I got a problem. Can you fix it? Instead of using those critical thinking muscles right now. So we see a lot of organizations wanting to help their staff to speak more thoughtfully, to learn to make those adjustments and handle change, and also think more critically in their role. That's more of the advanced level skills that we want everyone to have. So, all staff, no matter what level, we want them to take root in their position and grow in their role. Now, let's shift over to the leaders section of our circle here. And the leaders have two responsibilities: to acclimate new hires and to cultivate their team. So, what does that mean? Acclimate breaks down into giving guidance to those new hires. That's the onboarding and mentoring right out the gate when folks join the organization. Acclimate also means we've got to strengthen the team and do some team building. A lot of companies kind of put team building on the back burner. They just think, oh, hey, Shelly's new on our team. Hey, everybody, this is Shelly. Shelly, this is everybody. All right, get to work. And they're not actually building that team and that trust and that camaraderie. So these managers have got to take ownership of making sure that folks not only come in and know how to do the job, but that they also know who they're working with and can start building that family or team within the team environment there. The other way to acclimate new hires is to show support. So checking in regularly with them, making sure they have additional resources to learn their job and to better understand the team as well. So acclimate is the big first part of the leader's responsibilities. The second responsibility is to cultivate their team. So this is ongoing. Now, a lot of us do have new hires coming in all the time, and the acclimate part is also ongoing. But for every employee on your team, you have to think about cultivating the relationships and their skills, their knowledge of the work, those kind of things. So the three actions under cultivate are to provide feedback. That is both positive and constructive feedback, to encourage advancement and to help them grow in their positions. We want them to grow, like we said earlier. So the managers need to help with that mentoring and finding opportunities for advancement. Even if there's no promotion available, there's a lot more ways to grow your knowledge, your network, and be able to grow your skills within your position as well. And then, of course, the third one is for the leaders to help navigate change for their team. We are constantly changing and updating systems and processes and team members and those we serve and even the building we're in and all of these things. And so it's leaders' responsibility to help navigate that change for their folks as well. So far, here's a little recap. We want everyone to take root and grow. And then we've got leaders who we want to acclimate the new hires and cultivate their entire team. All right, so just two main responsibilities for each one. We're going to shift over to the third area in the circle, which is our executive team. And their two responsibilities are to establish the right environment. Remember that kind of greenhouse looking protective shield around our house plants. They have to establish that environment and then equip the leaders and staff with the resources they need. So in our model, the three actions that have to be taken in order to establish the right environment is first, we have to assess the values of this organization. And I know a lot of people have very long-standing values and mission statement, vision, those types of things. But right now we have to reassess and make sure that we are attractive as far as our values and our mission and vision for the new workforce. So I see a lot of companies kind of updating and upgrading those as well, which we'll dive into in a future episode here on Bridge the Gap as well. We also want folks to set priorities. Some companies don't have enough retention-based priorities, and other companies I see overloading their priorities and having way too many on their leaders' plates. So got to keep that in check. And the other way to establish the right environment, once we have the right values and the right priorities set, is to analyze the capacity. What does it look like? What does a new org chart look like? If you were to start from scratch and not just take the old org chart that we have tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked, but to say, what do our team members really need? How many direct reports should leaders really have? And who owns retention? We'll talk again later about kind of different roles in HR and what that needs to look like as well. But we have to take a real look at our capacity to make sure that we have the right people in the right seats, as they say, and be sure we're not overloading folks, because that will cause not only the person that's overloaded to leave, but even worse, if it's a leader who's overloaded, it'll push a lot of their staff members to leave because their staff don't feel like they have a boss that has time for them and can check in with them and help them and support them. All right. So moving on to the last section here, the last responsibility that the executives have is to equip the leaders and the staff with the resources that they need. So those three actions are, first, to develop the leaders, make sure that they have ongoing leadership training, not just compliance training and operational training, but actual leadership skills of building emotional intelligence and communication and empathy and different skills that are needed to get and manage and keep today's new workforce. The second is to leverage technology. We have to make sure that our actual equipment that our staff and leaders are using is up to date and well maximized. So some companies I talk to, they're actually pretty out of date and behind on their technology, which is a hindrance for their team. And others are right where they need to be, but technology changes quickly. So we have to look forward and make sure that we are leveraging the technology as best we can to lighten up the load for our folks. You know, in our field, we tend to ask our people year after year after year to do more with less, do more with less, do more with less. And unfortunately, I don't think we can really do more with less, but there is some technology, including AI and things like that, that are hopefully going to help us moving forward. We're already seeing some of that. Of course, it's not replacing bedside care or anything like that, but we can definitely find some efficiencies on our operational and administrative side over time, if not with other support for our caregiving as well. So just make sure that we're kind of checking in on the technology, that we're not getting behind with that, is a big piece of equipping our folks with what they need. And the final piece of equipment that we need to provide our leaders and staff is meaningful compensation. So that means that it's not just the same old compensation model that we've always had in the past, but really realizing what means something to our staff and our leaders as far as sacrifice. For example, it used to be we paid a lot more for the overnight third shift, which was the hardest one to fill back in the day. But now I find with a lot of organizations that second shift is the hardest to fill. So we switch the compensation and make the differential on second shift more hefty than on third shift, because we have to pay for that sacrifice of people not being able to head home and have dinner with their family and put their kiddos to bed and things like that. So we have to really think differently about having meaningful compensation to equip our leaders with that tool to keep people, and to compensate fairly and effectively with our staff to be more attractive as an organization that draws in strong talent. I know that was so much to cover, but if you want to see the graphics for this, we will put them in the show notes. And also, if you go to employeeretentionecosystem.com, you can see all of these graphics that I'm describing here and kind of follow along and see how that goes. Now, I want to share with you also a tool that we put together. So there's a lot of these different components. Like I said, 18 different actions that have to be taken by staff, by leaders, and by executives combined, luckily. But these 18 different areas can be assessed. So we actually created an 18 statement audit tool that you can go to magnetvault.com and download that audit. It gives you one statement about each one of these areas. So for example, it says things like, our staff feel that team members build positive connections with one another. Our staff feel that team members are mindful of how their words and actions impact others. Then there's leadership questions about our staff feel that leaders show sufficient appreciation and provide meaningful feedback, or our leaders give effective guidance to them through ongoing organizational changes. Of course, there's executive level questions about those mission, vision, and values that we talked about clear priorities and sustainable workloads. And so, if you're not sure which of these areas that your organization needs to focus on, or if you want to figure out, are we missing a piece of this? Because if you're just working on one piece of the puzzle and you don't realize that other pieces are either missing or need work, or they're going to be affected by the change you're making on the other side, you may negate yourself or just be throwing money at initiatives that are not helpful at all. So definitely go to magnetvault.com, check out the audit. And an interesting thing that we have done with this audit is we force leaders before they answer the questions, we force them to take off their leadership hat. Take it off. Act like staff. Take this assessment as if you were staff. Think about this for just a second. Even if you're not going to go and do the assessment, just think about this for a second. If you were to look at your organization from staff's perspective or from a candidate or applicant's perspective, are we as attractive as we think we are? You know, because a lot of these areas of the audit tool, what I find in my workshops is when I have the leaders fill these out and we look at the scores and kind of debrief all of that, we find out that if they had taken the audit or if they had assessed themselves with their own lens, then they're going to score higher, right? You're going to give yourself a higher score if you are scoring yourself because of something like if I was to ask, how good is your onboarding, right? How effective is your onboarding? You might include your intention or your historical knowledge and say, well, it's better than it used to be. So it's not perfect, but it's not bad. Where a new hire coming in might walk in and see even the newer, updated version of your onboarding, and they might say, this is bad. This is not fun. It's not good. It's not effective. And so you tend to, as a leader, score yourself a bit higher, a bit more positively, because you know that you're trying and you've put that intent and historical knowledge into the score. So it's fascinating to me because we score, when you do the audit, we score folks on, are you thriving in that area? Are you just surviving in that area? Or are you honestly wilting in that area and it needs some serious attention? And sometimes I'll have a person who comes back with their scores and they've got almost all thriving, like, you know, fours and fives out of five. And they're saying, yeah, we're doing great. We're doing great. And what's interesting is sometimes those people are just delusional and they are not at all in tune with what's actually going on around them, which sometimes happens. And then other times when I ask them more about, okay, wow, you're thriving in all these areas. Tell me what you've done. What have you put in effort to improve over the last couple of years? And they will start listing out, well, we started doing this and we started doing that. And, you know, they've revamped their onboarding again. They've revamped their compensation model. They're doing leadership development. They've got all these investments of time and dollars that are going into it. And they have really put their money where their mouth is. So sometimes you can have a really strong positive score, but a lot of times I'm finding that our organizations in particular within this field tend to be surviving. We tend to be just getting through every day and just trying to put one foot in front of the other to get to the next day. And that's not a fun place to be. It's not an exciting place to be. And our managers and leaders certainly are not happy to stay in that space when they'd really like to go on vacation and not come back feeling completely underwater and behind at the time. But that's the reality that we're sitting in right now. So, where do we go from here? I recommend that you take the audit yourself if you haven't already paused and gone to get that at magnetvault.com. And I also encourage you, you know, if you want real change, if you want real action to happen, the best way that I see that happen is when the entire executive team in particular, and sometimes going all the way down the whole leadership team, when they do this audit activity together. When you send out the audit and say, let me know your true and honest thoughts. If you were to put yourself in the staff's shoes, remember that important instruction that's on there, and Collect that information. Take a look at which areas all of the leaders agree need some work. And maybe there's areas that you disagree on. Some departments or some areas might say, no, I think our onboarding's great. And others say, nope, 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 it needs a lot of work, right? Different folks may have different opinions, but I often find that a lot of times the leadership team tends to be on the same page about where the actual issues are. They have just never done an activity this deep with these 18 different areas to really explore all the reasons that people are quitting today. So be careful not to, once you take the audit, especially if your executive team is totally on board with this and says, yes, we're going to start prioritizing based on our low scores and what we need to improve. Be careful not to overcommit yourself and say, well, these 5 areas of the 18 need work. So hey, person number 1, you go work on that. Person number 2, you work on that one. Person number 3, you work on that one, and start delegating everything. In fact, we created a retention roadmap. It's really just a calendar. Okay. I'll let the cat out of the bag. It's just a blank calendar, but we use it in our workshops to help leaders to prioritize and say, okay, for Q1, this is what we're going to focus on. And then for Q2, this is what we're going to focus on. Instead of just making a long list of priorities, actually scheduling those out quarter by quarter of what is realistic. What can we truly commit to and promise and fulfill to show our team that we are headed in the appropriate direction and that we're listening to them and we're going to continue creating that better place to work. All right. So I hope that this was a great overview for you to understand how complex and comprehensive retention is. It's not just a silver bullet issue of, yeah, well, just pay your people more or just do this, just do that. It really does take a more holistic view and an approach that is going to attack different weaker areas, not all at once, but in the right priority and at the right time to get to where you want to go. So you got to be realistic about it. Okay. Now, this whole series, I'm doing an episode a month on this ecosystem and retention strategies and the evolution of the workforce. So throughout this year, I'm going to be diving into different components of the ecosystem. So we are going to talk about all different areas that we can dive into, like leadership development and onboarding and change management, all these different areas. So make sure to come back, subscribe today so that you can be notified when new episodes of mine and the whole contribution team is coming out. We'll be talking more, I know, about professionalism and values and capacity. So I just can't wait. I'm excited to dive in a little later. If you want to keep in touch between now and my next episode, I am on LinkedIn. It's Cara Silletto. That's Cara with a C. And thanks so much for listening to this week's Bridge the Gap Contributor Wednesday.